What up, people? Pushing While Black here, and I want to do something a little different. I saw I Am Not Your Negro yesterday, and I don't know if I'm gonna do movie reviews, but this is kind of me thinking out loud here with seeing this movie and just kind of thinking of some things that's been bouncing around in my head that I figured this movie would be a great jumping off point. So if it sounds a little rambly, just bear with me, y'all. I'm kind of thinking out loud here. But anyway, me and two of my friends went to go see I Am Not Your Negro at my suggestion. And it was, first of all, from an editing standpoint, as a person that's a video editor and appreciates the art of editing, because it is an art, if not a science, that it was brilliantly edited. That was brilliantly done. Raoul Peck's choice of editing clips and speeches to go along with Mr. Baldwin's one letter to his literary agent and I believe the first pages of the book. I could be wrong because he was only able to finish 30 pages of a book that he wanted to write about the intersections of Medgar Evers, who was a civil rights activist in Mississippi, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and how he knew and met all of them and their families, and how they intersected each other, and how race affected their executions. What the movie is about, though, that was the foundation, and then it weaves into this great inspection about race itself in this country, and the choice of editing to showcase that we really haven't, as far as brutality, at least in my opinion, and this was mentioned by one of my friends, we really haven't gotten as far as we think we have, because at least from a brutality standpoint, we can all, for the most part, work, although we're still very high, and as black people, we're still very high. We still have very high poverty rates. We're still being talked about because there was a part in the movie concerning there was a great it was a great commercial that it seemed like it was from 1960s or 50s, and it was basically talking about the and I'm gonna use the term here because it was in the movie, the Negro buying power. So it was basically to tell white businesses to don't forget about your Negro buying power, the Negro, consumer base, and it had everybody. It was basically like the white picket fence, It's basically like the white picket fence, the typical American dream, but with black faces, and they were explaining, that the Negro has more money now, and they're upper class, and they have all this money that as businesses we can take advantage of, which still goes on today, as far as companies can take our money but not really give a damn about us as far as people, but they can take our money. So, but there was a couple of things that stood out to me. And I say early because the two philosophies kind of softened in Malcolm's case, and I'm not even going to say hardened in Martin's case, because I think it was always there, but I think we've been spoon-fed I have a dream speech, and the more positive speeches about racial equality versus his speeches about capitalism versus his speeches about You know, the letter from a Birmingham jail is a perfect example about how toward the end he was thinking that integration was not necessarily a good idea. Which, if you talk to some old heads, like if you talk to an old head in a bar, to some old heads in a barbershop, or like some old heads like on some philosophical like intellectual stuff, they'll tell you that there is an idea by some people that integration was a bad thing, and not that segregation was a good thing, but we lost our identity as black people when we integrate. We lost our identity. We lost like black-owned businesses, and now there's a fury among black scholars and black intellectuals and black economists to invest in black businesses when we had that during segregation, and we never really, it wasn't that we took it seriously, but we wanted integration so bad that we forgot our identity as far as businesses go. So it seemed, so there was a great, not necessarily exchange, but there was a great segment of interviews about Malcolm, criticism of Martin Luther King, and King's response. And there's been, with radical Nation of Islam still, that, and it's not prevalent now because there's no need, but the idea that, you know what I'm saying, Martin Luther King, the nonviolent approach wasn't the best approach. If you look at it from a philosophical standpoint, and you actually look at and I'm just going to take a little chunk from this. If you look at it from a philosophical point, and you take it from what the nonviolent way was supposed to do back then, there's a great quote later on in the movie where Baldwin says, it was like white people think Alabama is their Mars. Like it was otherworldly that this was happening. So when you look at Alabama, and when you look at segregation, and when you look at all the issues on the southern part of the country, it almost seemed like white people was oblivious to what was going on. And the parallels between that now, it's not that they're oblivious, but it's like we're overreacting. See, whenever we talk about, and sometimes I'll get into disability here in a minute, because as a disabled black man, I have thoughts concerning this movie and minority. When we talk about, when the majority hears the cries of the minority, the majority always assumes that the minority is overreacting. Now, back then, it was almost like it wasn't a thing. It wasn't real. You know what I'm saying? So when Mr. Baldwin talks about it, it was almost like Alabama was our Mars. There's a reason why, and I learned this in my government class, there's a reason why Martin Luther King Jr. had to do what he had to do non-violently. Because when you look at the power of media back then, he basically used the power of media, because the sit-ins and the issues with the sit-ins and the not necessarily the lynchings, but the police brutality that was shown on the nightly news, it was smack dab in the middle of everybody's living rooms now. Just as Vietnam was smack dab in everybody's living rooms in the 70s, and it was like, wow, this is a problem. So we have to do something. The consciousness of America was awoken when you saw people getting mauled by dogs and fire hoses being put on them. So it was like there had to be an act. There had to be a reason. There had to be action done. So while the non-violent, while the violent ways seem to be, and Malcolm wasn't talking about like going after white people, but Malcolm was like, if they attack you, attack first. But in the non-violent way, you actually got to show the humanity of the black man and the inhumanity of the white man in those video clips. And because of that, I think that it was the foundation that made the Civil Rights Act possible. And they talked about John F. Kennedy, and they talked about Bobby Kennedy, and one of my friends seemed to think that they really didn't do anything because there was a scene, and I'm not going to give the whole movie away. There's a scene where I think she was the aide to Bobby Kennedy. She's a black lady. She wrote Raising the Sun. She's a playwright, and she wrote Raising the Sun. And they were talking about, can you have your brother, the president, walk with this black girl as she walks to school, because as the school gets integrated, and that would be a symbol to the rest of the country, that if you spit at this girl, you are also spitting at the president. Do you really want to do that? So Bobby Kennedy was like, no, that would be a fruitless endeavor. And that was before signing of the Civil Rights Movement in 1964. So yeah, that was something that I took from it. Those situations, those 2 points of the movie, that was something that I took away from it. I kind of enjoyed the 2 stark contrasts between the Martin Luther King and early Malcolm before he went to Mecca, and he kind of softened he kind of softened, I don't want to say rhetoric, but he kind of softened his stance when it came to white devilness. I also found it cool when he mentioned how he wasn't really he didn't really find his place in the movement because he wasn't a Black Panther, he wasn't a Muslim, he wasn't a Black Panther he wasn't a Black Muslim because he said he didn't feel that all white people needed to be hated or are devils. He said he wasn't a Black Christian because and I totally get this, because they don't live by what they teach. Well, it wasn't Black Christian. He wasn't a Christian because he's like, they don't live by what they teach, and he wasn't part of the NAACP. And this was interesting. He said that it was in the South, it was more about activism and fighting for things, whereas the North, it was more about class warfare between blacks. So it wasn't necessarily an advocacy group in a civil rights organization. It was more of a place where we can separate the classes. And he said by him being the shoe shine boy, they looked down on him. And that kind of resonated with me too, because because where I grew up in Chicago, how it's really, we practice de facto segregation in Chicago, where it's not like, just in your face, like, hey, Black people stay here, white people stay here, and there's signs. And then poor Black people stay here, poor or working class people stay here, poor white working class people stay here. Black people with money stay here. Black people without money stay here. So it's like, I didn't know that the NAACP practiced that, but I do know that there is a divide among classes when it comes to Black America, and I've seen it, me being almost 35, and I didn't know that it was like that back in the day either, especially as high as NAACP is. So that was interesting. Let's see what other talking points I have here. The idea of Black people being bitter or angry, that is something that is still going on today. Because one of the last interviews that he talked about, he talked about a white man called him bitter. It was in one of the, and they were saying how Negroes have made so much progress, and like, it was basically Negroes made so much progress. Why are we so bitter? And as it edits back and forth to what's going on now and to what's going on, what was going on back then, my argument is progress in what way? Because yeah, we can work now, we can live wherever we want to live, although, with de facto segregation in some parts, I don't think that's necessarily true. I live in a pretty diverse area, but I also live in the South, and I live in the South now, and I live in Dallas, and Dallas is one of the most racially diverse. Now, there is racism here, economically, but not, living wise. It's more classes here. Whereas, there's racism here, but it's more classes here. Whereas, like, there's still de facto racism up north, and it's getting better, but it's still here. And on the police brutality tip, it hasn't changed. We've all had stories. Everyone has stories. My channel, the name for the channel is, and I've said this before, due to a situation that I had in my wheelchair going to work. Apparently being in a business area of a suburb of Dallas where I wasn't supposed to be, even though it was 9 o'clock in the morning and I was pushing to work. And when I talk about racism, when it comes to disability, I have some white disabled friends that think I'm crazy when I talk about this. But, my other racial things have happened in cars where they just saw me and 2 other black men or 3 other black men in a car, and they felt like we were doing something wrong. So, yeah, we still get profiled, we still get shot at, we still get shot. The economic discrepancy among Black and white Americans is a thing, to the point that it still affects our neighborhoods. So I'm not going to say we haven't made any progress, but the fact that it was edited such in a brilliant way to show that we still have a long way to go is awesome. And we still have a long way to go. And to be quite honest, I looked at the racial makeup of the movie theater. It was pretty balanced. So it was black people. It was a lot of black people there, but it was a good smattering of white people and other races there. So this was a very thought-provoking movie. It was a very thought-provoking movie, and I really enjoyed it. It's probably something I'm going to buy when it comes out on digital release or when it comes out on DVD. And I don't buy movies. I don't own movies. I basically just rent them or watch them when they come out. But I'm going to have to buy this. That's how cool it was. That's how much it affected me as a black man. I will have to say this though, and this is probably for another video. There's a part in the video where they mentioned, not mentioned, but there's a part of the video where they were seeing all these black faces. We're seeing all these black faces, and this is a spoiler, but it doesn't really it doesn't really show like an ending, because it really isn't an ending here, but it's more like a closing frame. They show all these pictures of black faces, and just phase in, phase in, phase in, phase in, phase in. Okay, and I'm just kind of like, I don't know. Because I was with one of my friends because we went out to dinner after seeing the movie. So we're sitting there waiting for dinner, and we were just talking about the movie, and he was giving me thoughts about the movie, and I was saying about like racism and about like de facto racism and growing up in the North and all this stuff, growing up in Chicago versus growing up here and stuff. And then like both of us are disabled. We have cerebral palsy. So I talk about ableism a lot. And I talk about ableism in the black community a lot. And when I talk about ableism in the black community and how it exists, it's weird because people, like my able-bodied black friends and family members, they look at me like I'm backwards when I talk about ableism. And when I talk about like black responsibility and stuff like that, and how ableism in the black community is really, really prevalent. And it's really, really prevalent on the police brutality tip, because, and I had him on my podcast, I had him on this YouTube channel. Go back and find the interview with Leroy Moore when he talks about them erasing disability from the police brutality aspect of, police brutality. Like when they're erasing disability, when news reports are doing that, that's a black thing. That's a black and a white thing. And the one issue that I'm starting to see as far as representation of blackness is, which I'm conscious of now. I didn't, at the end of the movie, when they showed the pictures of black faces, now, I didn't see representation of myself. And one of the prevalent themes in the movie is, and I don't think it was Peck's design, I just think, when I talk about ableism, like, it's not a hatred of it's not a hatred of disabled people. The core issue with ableism is indifference. So I don't think it was Peck's design to do this, but I was just very astute of the fact that there was no disabled face. There was no disabled body. There was no, what I'm saying? And I know for a fact we exist. There's a large group of black disabled people. We're all writing, and in my case, vlogging and doing podcasts, and we're doing what we're doing. Thank goodness for social media that a lot of us are meeting and finding out about each other. But it just, one of the tones of the movie, one of the beginning tones of the movie is representation of African Americans, and especially in film and heroes. And Mr. Baldwin was talking about how most of his heroes were white, and most of his heroes were white and he didn't see the representation of blackness that he saw was very, very little, and what he did see was like step and fetch it type stuff, which he really didn't like. You know what I'm saying? And it was only until he got a little older and Sidney Poitier was doing was doing what he was doing, and Harry Belafonte was really doing what they were doing. And there's a great there's a great little segment on that too, which I'm not gonna go into, but I can with. But also, it's a parallel with disability as well. But I'm not gonna go into that either, to because I want y'all to actually see the movie. But when he talks about representation in his early life, he said all his heroes were white, and he detested the black sketch and fetch it type of characters that he saw on TV, but there was no real representation of his father or himself on TV. And Speechless is wonderful now, but there's no representation. I don't see myself. I never got to see myself as a kid. You know what I'm saying? I got to see black people, but I never got to see a dude and a guy in a wheelchair like living, life and playing sports and doing the stuff that you do as a kid. You don't really get to see people you don't really get to see like faces or representations of yourself in the media. You do, but you have to look for them now. Like Matt Scott is doing good things, is doing great things as far as playing basketball, and there's good things in sports and stuff. But as far as like on an acting tip, there's not a lot. You know what I'm saying? So I just find it funny as a disabled person, and we in the disabled community are talking about representation. I just found it kind of astute that we're talking about black faces and black life and all this stuff, and not all forms of blackness are being represented. But it was that's just a little aside. That's just a little aside or a little rant about that personal thing. This is something that I noticed. But yeah, it was a wonderful movie. Everybody needs to go see that movie. The movie was wonderfully done. It was wonderfully edited. And that's my 2 cents. And I hope you guys enjoy this, because I'm probably gonna interview. I'm probably gonna do because I have some theories about that new Get Out movie, and I'm probably gonna do something on that too. But hope you guys enjoyed it. Pushing Wild Black out. Later.